electric cars. They're really dull and clinical and boring and ordinary, right?
But we have 3 cars here that might prove that wrong.
We're here in the Peak District and we're about to find out which is our best fun EV. Okay, so I have bought this, which is our big new car hook. This is the Alpine A290. This is the GTS version, top of the line. It is reportedly the first proper electric hot hatchback. It's just under 1.5 tons of weight. It's just under 4 meters long. It has a motor in the front wheel drive, and just under 220 horsepower, and it costs about £40,000. Illya, what have you got, mate?
I've brought the Mini Cooper SE, which is a Mini Cooper S, but electric. It has about 215 brake horsepower, and without all the silly sport bits that this one has, and which you don't want, it costs £34,500 and does about 240 miles. What about you, Johnny?
Well, I have brought a car that beats both of them for power and performance. It's the Cupra Born VZ. 322 brake horsepower, 295 pound-foot, around £45,000. So a bit more expensive, but it's going to leave you two for dead.
Right, shall we go?
Yes, because I'm cold.
And I'm cold, let's go.
Hello and welcome to the Mini Cooper SE. Now, if you haven't been keeping up with Mini nomenclature, the Cooper is now just the hatchback, which makes sense because a lot of people were calling it the Mini Cooper anyway, and the E is the electric. SE is the slightly longer, slightly more powerful version. The SE costs from £29,900, but this one is in sport trim, which gives you the big wheels and the spoiler, but doesn't actually change anything mechanical. They've done something quite clever, because you can still buy a petrol one, which looks almost exactly the same at a glance, but it's a completely different car underneath. That's basically a kind of heavy facelift of the outgoing Mini. This is a completely new car, and it's built on, it's called the Spotlight platform, which has been developed in conjunction with Great Wall Motors. Yes, of Aura Funky Cat infamy. But this is a completely different car from the Aura Funky Cat. This is a skateboard electric platform developed mostly by BMW. So it's been designed from the ground up as an electric car. So it's got a big battery pack in the floor rather than like the old Mini Electric where it was basically a converted petrol car. They've done it quite cleverly, because even though I am sitting on the battery, the drive position is very similar to the old car. It's still very low, it's very outstretched, wheels nice and close to me, and it feels like a small hatchback, unlike the others, which feels slightly more crossovery. You can get a Cooper E with a fairly small battery that gives you about 200 miles officially, or you can get this SE, which has a 54 kilowatt hour battery with 250 miles officially. Obviously, now it's winter, it's less than 200 miles, but that's still a usable amount. And in general, what I really like about this car, I've done plenty of miles in it so far, is that it really feels like a Mini. And electric power just suits the concept of a Mini very well. All 21st century Minis have had this very distinctive dynamic character. They've all felt very, very small, very immediate, very zippy, and the immediate accelerator response that you get with an electric car just fits into that picture really nicely. And even though this is a lot heavier than Minis of old, it has the same really immediate character. You can feel the weight, I'll get to that in a moment, but the first thing you notice is the steering, which is very quick, quite light, and you've got a lot of grip, so you get this very darty, very immediate handling, and that just suits a Mini really well. Now, with 215 horsepower and instant power, it can be a bit busy, it can be a bit scrabbly, and there's quite a lot of torque steer, but I actually quite like that, because it just, again, it suits the character. It's got this very kind of eager, puppyish demeanour about it. What's really good about this Cooper SE as well is that they've tuned it to feel like a proper hatch. So it's front wheel drive, but with quite a light back end. So you can really throw it around and it'll lift off oversteer a bit if you try, because it's got several modes for the traction and stability control. When it's on, it's really safe, keeps everything in check, very good. But when you put it in the Sport Plus mode, I think it's called, it keeps the traction control on, so it doesn't just go wild when you put your foot down, but it also relaxes the stability control, and it actually uses torque vectoring to nip at the inside brakes to really turn you into corners. And a couple of years ago I drove one of these, a prototype, on a track, and you could get it hilariously sideways. Of course, on the road that isn't as relevant, but when you're on a nice twisty road you can just feel it move around, and it gives you a great sense of fun. Instead of a normal gauge cluster and the center screen, you just get this big round OLED screen and nothing in your field of view. And I actually quite like that, because it's a really nice modern reinterpretation of the classic Isogonis Mini dash. But some people really don't like having no instruments in front of them and having to look left to see their speed. And it must be said that this screen has plenty of usability issues. Some settings are really hard to find, and the Apple CarPlay is literally a square peg in a round hole. In all, it's quite a divisive thing, this new Mini Electric. Some people just don't get on with it because they find it too much. The digital screen's a bit of a pain, and the ride's quite busy, and the torque steer and the scrabbling are... It's quite an energetic, puppyish kind of car. But others, including me, just find that really endearing. It's the hot hatch experience translated into the electric car.
Right then, here we are. We are in an Alpine A290 on UK roads for the first time. Now you'll notice I'm sitting on the left of the car, so we're a little bit too early to be driving right-hand drive cars on UK roads, and that it tends to make the road tester's job a little bit more complicated, because you are obviously sitting on the wrong side of the car when you're getting your driving impressions. So I am sat here now, driving on the left, sitting on the left, right in the gutter. I'm getting all of the ride inputs from the broken verge side of the road, and normally it can be a bit difficult to kind of compensate for that when you're trying to judge a car. But on this occasion, it doesn't really make too much of a difference, because the A290 has a really sophisticated ride. The damping on it is just so lovely and supple and sophisticated and clever. So I could drive down this road right up to the limit, pretty much as fast as I dare, and I feel no different for sitting on the wrong side of the car. It's absolutely fine. I am sitting, I suppose, a little bit higher than I'd like, maybe an inch or two. The driving position's quite classically hot hatchback. It's a little bit raised, it's a little bit sort of sit up and beg. It could do with a little bit more reach adjustment on the steering column, I suspect, but it's pretty good. The cabin, that's a really impressive piece of work, I think. The car's obviously quite small, it's less than 4 metres long. As clever as they can be with the packaging of a car that small, it's never going to be as practical as some of the cars that you might buy for the money. So the second, it's a 5-door car, but the second row seats, they're only sort of kiddie-sized, really. They're better than the Mini, but if you came to putting full-size adults in the back of your Alpine A290, I don't think they'd thank you for staying there very long. So technically what we've got the first sort of electric hatchback that sort of begins to feel a bit like a classic fast compact hot hatchback from a sort of a technical standpoint. So we've got a little car that's less than 4 metres long, front wheel drive, got 217 imperial horsepower, which is kind of about right for a hot hatchback. Drives through the front wheels. You'll be able to get an entry level A290 GT model, which will have 178 horsepower, I think. I'm not too sure whether Alpine UK are going to offer that, or if they're just going to go for the top of the range car, but this is a top of the range GTS. So it's got all the spec, all the power, I think 62 miles an hour from rest in 6.4 seconds. So again, that is right in the middle of classic hot hatchback performance type territory. You can tell they were basically aiming for a proper classic hot hatchback with all the right credentials that nobody could argue with. So what does all that add up to? Well, what you don't expect from this car is the sort of level of instant sophistication that it has. There's a real sense of smoothness and finely honed dynamic finish about this car. Real finesse, which I guess Alpine and then Renault Sport before it were pretty used to producing. But cars in this class just haven't had, really. So it isn't bouncing all over the shop over bumps and lumps. It isn't threatening to bounce you into the weeds because it's so firm and it's working so hard to be exciting. There's notes of finesse and sophistication about the ride, a sense of composure that just lasts and lasts. You can push this car faster and faster and faster if you want to, and it just gets better and better. So through tighter corners, there's a real sense of finesse, I suppose you say, and fluency to the way this car handles. We're on a really nadgery, bumpy road now that's got lots of lefts and rights and ups and downs, and it's just so easy to put this car exactly where you want it. It's just so easy to drive. There's a lovely flow to the way it just goes left and right and through the apexes. As I said, it's not the very fastest thing in a straight line that you could buy. It isn't the nuclear option. If you want to blow people away at the traffic lights, this isn't the way to do it. But if you want a car that is a joy to drive at low speeds and high speeds, that has all of the composure and everything that's been missing, I think. Everything you've been waiting for an EV to get ever since affordable performance cars started to drop off and all the money started to go into electric cars. We've been waiting a long time, haven't we, for those electric cars to really be interesting and to really come together as drivers' cars. I think this A290 is a bit of a line in the sand, and I think it's going to win this little test hands down, to be honest.
And so welcome to the interior of the Cupra Born VZ. Now, immediately looking at this car, you might think that it's basically the same as the standard Born, which you also might think that it's basically just an ID3 in drag. I thought the same when I took delivery of this car last night, until I looked at the spec sheet, because you do actually get quite a few extra, bits and pieces over the standard Born. You get VZ badging on the back, you get some new colour options, which, by the way, are actually quite muted. If you're buying a car with specifically as much power as this is, which we'll come to, you would expect slightly more interesting colours anyway. And you get bigger alloys. This one is running 20-inch wheels on Bridgestone Potenza tyres, which are rated for 186 miles an hour. Seems like overkill on a car that maxes out at 124, but anyway. Cupra claims a 0-62 time of 5.6 seconds, which makes it the fastest car here. We actually tested it at 5.4, and indeed 422 pound-foot of torque really isn't to be sniffed at. The levels of acceleration it offers are never not enough. I mean, it weighs 1924 kilograms, but even so, you're never left wanting when you put your right foot down. That comes courtesy of the AP550 electric motor, which has basically been lifted from the ID7, except in the ID7 this produces quite a lot more power. This is obviously the most powerful Born there has ever been, and it's the most powerful electric motor that has been developed by Volkswagen. But it's also it's really smooth. It's not intimidating to drive. I'm not sure Cupra will thank me for saying this, but this car underneath is basically a Volkswagen, and Volkswagens have never ever been intimidating cars to drive, and this really, really is not one whatsoever. So that's the powertrain covered, but what about the chassis? There are quite a few revisions from the VZ over the standard Born. You get new springs and dampers at the rear, reworked springs and dampers at the front. You get a recalibrated regenerative braking system, a new steering system, servotronic steering system, so it weights up the faster that you go. A pretty convincing hot hatch. Alright, I'm not going to kid you, this weighs just shy of 2 tons. It's not a hot hatchback in the typical sense, but you can't argue with the fact that a rear-driven 322 brake horsepower car with 402 pounds-foot of torque, I'm not saying it's a handful, but it's definitely going to keep you entertained, and it's definitely going to keep you interested in the drive. I mean, it's a Cupra at the end of the day. Cupra talk at great lengths at, how much money they spend on making their cars fun to drive and trying to attract a young audience. and you can definitely get the sense of that in here. Our complaint sheet about the Born's interior doesn't add up to very much, if I'm honest. We've always liked its sporty, copper-infused cabin ambience and material appeal. This VZ takes it up ever so slightly with suede Seabelt sports seats. Aside from that, it's a standard Born. And just on the interior, there's not really very much that's different about this car compared with the regular Born. I mean, is that such a bad thing? The Born's interior is already quite a nice place to sit, you know, with the copper finishes and what have you. And it is, at the end of the day, it is a VW interior, so its usability is there. It's not quite as there as it was, but it's definitely, you know, after 2 weeks, you're going to be very, very comfortable with how this car operates inside. And in a complete change of topic, what about handling dynamics? Now, as I said earlier on, this car is by no means a handful. It has a lot of power and a lot of torque relative to its size, with the caveat that it's quite heavy. The battery pack is increased in size over the standard Born. So you've got 84 kilowatt hours, usable at 79 kilowatt hours, which gives a theoretical range of around 370 miles, but that is in summer. In winter, I've sort of been seeing 300 miles. Real world, you're going to get that to about 270, which is by no means terrible. I mean, when you compare it to the Mini and the Alpine, that's quite a significant increase. The steering is lively. The steering is, you know, the front wheels are left just to do the job of steering because, of course, it's rear-wheel drive. So the steering is lively, it's light, it's precise. It's a very game-handling car, and you get that really, really nice sensation of being pushed out of the corners because, you know, 400 odd pound-foot of torque. Ultimately, though, it has the performance you expect from a hot hatchback, and it balances that with a generally unintimidating sense of fluidity around corners and a nice ride quality.
Okay, so we've all spent a good long day driving all of these three cars. Johnny, what do you like and why?
I think my favourite one is going to have to be the Alpine. It cannot be denied, in my opinion, how much fun this car is to drive. It just delivers on the brief of best fun EV, unlike either of these two really do, but for very specific reasons. The braking feel is absolutely tremendous. You can really, really lean on them. You've got a proper wheel at each corner stance that makes it feel really agile, really low centre of gravity, and it just feels like a really, really accomplished, almost sports car, especially in comparison to these two and the Cupra. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Cupra is an incredibly capable car, but I just feel like it just doesn't feel set enough in its ways. That feels like a family car with a lot of power, and it's very capable. These feel like ground up, hot hatchback.
Sort of lives up to the big billing, doesn't it? You know, everything you've read about it so far, you know, I think it bears the weight of all this hot hatch stuff really well, and it feels like a proper performance tuned product in a way that maybe the Cupra doesn't quite. And you can tell that it's had a lot of attention and a lot of money spent on the detail, the dynamic details. You know, the suspension damping, the body control is just feels so sophisticated. The steering's so tactile. It's got all this, you know, the torque delivery is just, it feels also so really polished and laboured over, and it really comes across. And you can just enjoy driving it right across the speed range of different roads. I find myself driving the Cupra and enjoying it from moment to moment, but maybe not in between. Whereas this, I think you can enjoy almost all the time. It's a really great thing. Illya, what do you want to argue for?
Well, I'm going to dissent and actually prefer the Mini. I see all you're saying about the Alpine and the Cupra, and the Alpine is great, but I just find the Mini to be more fun. The Alpine is very polished, but the Mini just has a bit more hot hatch energy. It's a bit more puppyish, and for a hot hatch, I think that really works. And with the Alpine, I just don't really get on with the seating position, and I do really like the Cupra because it's rear-wheel drive, and that's quite a rare thing in a hot hatch. But for just everyday, day-to-day fun and having something that feels a bit special, I think it's the Mini all day long.
Yeah, I couldn't vote for this quite so much, mate, because of the usability side of it. I guess we're at slightly different stages of life, and I would just struggle to use this car in the same way that I could that. And then again, the Cupra. The Cupra is a really usable car. I think that's one of the best things about it. the Alpine somewhere in the middle, but I'd get a lot more out of it day to day. I'd find more reasons to drive it than I would this, and I think that's a really key factor here. Having fun in cars isn't just about how much fun you're having while you're driving it, it's about how many occasions you have to use it in the first place. And for me, though the Alpine's between these two, I think it's just the right sort of balance for usability and fun. So that's where we'll leave it. Thank you for watching, thank you for liking and subscribing. The big Autocar Best Fun EV test will be in Autocar magazine towards the end of February, so make sure you check that out, and we'll see you next time.